or better. Joined by Kendall Kaut, covers Baylor men's basketball. They have West Virginia tonight, who got blown out, pulverized by Texas in Austin on Saturday. Kendall, thanks for your time. When Baylor was 0-2, did you ever foresee them being 8-4 at this point?
I thought there was an outside shot it could happen, Smokey. They beat my expectations. The thing I was hopeful for Baylor was those losses to K-State and TCU were pretty close. And the Iowa State game play without L.J. Cryer, you felt like there was something that Baylor had that could maybe get them to be their best against UCLA. But they've certainly beaten expectations compared to how low they got for some folks. I remember I wrote an article saying, hey, what would Baylor have to do to even make the NCAA tournament from here? And several people even said, win one game first. I can't believe we're saying this. We won't have to even debate this for very long. So they've beaten where a lot of the fans' expectations were earlier. But given how good they were thought of in the preseason, I think this is where Baylor should be. And it's nice to see that we're able to remedy the ship.
Kendall, they are playing with the full roster, and they have been since that, second or third game in the Big 12 schedule. They were playing pretty much with the full roster. And then even more of the roster than we all thought they were really going to reasonably have this year when you add Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua back in the game, into the lineup. How much does that change everything, projecting it out forward of what this team could really do?
I think it gives the offense a change to even be better. You know, the Baylor has the number one offense in the country, Paul, and as a result of that, I think the thought is often, okay, you're number one. Being number one just means you want to stay where you are. But you can still have a gap between how big number one is to number two is. And while John had some struggles moving laterally against TCU that might impact him going forward, I mean, the defense doesn't hit a huge level. Baylor might be able to challenge the idea that you can have a defense that's sub 50 nationally if your offense is just that good. And it's John's ability to hit threes. He didn't make those threes on Saturday, but I really like the form he has, and I love how wide he sets screens. There's a big difference if you're a defender going between Flo Thamba screens, which are very tough, get into your body, but not quite as wide, and John's screens that are set quicker but wider, which makes it tough for tough for a defensive player to see how the offensive player can react to that. So I think John gives a different dimension, both screening-wise and more spacing for Baylor's offense. So it'll be tougher to defend those guards, which means I think the offense, which has been the nation's best in the country since the flip of the calendar, could be even better than the field over the second half of the season.
Adam Flagler, Big 12 Player of the Week. I don't think that comes as much surprise. How good did you think he was in those two contests last week, Kendall?
I thought he was exceptional, Craig. And this is, again, Adam Flagler has that clutch gene. OU, Gonzaga, UCLA, and then again against TCU. With just a pretty good performance, Baylor loses all four of those games. Took exemplary performances from Adam Flagler. When I was walking to the parking lot in South Dakota, I was with Ashley Hodge from the site as well. And Ashley made a little joke, not realizing that Mark Few was around, and Few was really depressed. And I thought that was the most I'd really seen him depressed, because it just felt like, what can you do when Adam Flagler has the ball late? There's nobody you feel more confident taking the final shot. And so if Baylor's season ends with Adam Flagler missing an off-the-dribble three, you can live with it because you feel so good about it with how well he's done throughout the season. And I thought he was a very deserving selection for Big 12 Player of the Week, Craig.
What happens if, in fact, Flagler, Cryer, George, and even Langston Love all click at once?
I think, Smokey, Baylor looks a lot more like that championship team from a few years ago, where obviously Flags was still around, Davion Mitchell, Jared Butler, and Maceo Teague could be that dominant. I think there's the potential for Langston Love to get some play as a small ball four at the end of games if Jalen Bridges is in foul trouble. Baylor hasn't really used that lineup. I know they've wanted to keep Caleb involved in case they need him down the stretch. But with how well Langston Love's been balling out, I mean, Scott Drew mentioned in the presser afterwards that it wasn't an injury concern as good as Keyonte George has been. It just felt like Langston gave the lineup and was the guy who was on that day. It helps you out because earlier in the season it always felt like, all right, two of the three guards have to be dominant. And if they're not, Baylor doesn't have a chance to beat any good teams. Well, now it's, hey, if one guy's dominant and one guy plays pretty well, one guy can even play catastrophically and Baylor can win. And that just gives them such a margin of error that's essential in a year where I think the field's not very good nationally.
Yeah, Langston appears to be kind of where everybody wants John to be, right? Where he's comfortable after the injury, moving around well, not timid, comfortable in what he's doing. And he, like, it doesn't even appear to me like he's off the bench, his ability wise. Like they could start him and feel pretty comfortable if the other three guards just didn't exist in their universe.
Completely agree, Paul. Look at Langston Love's three-point shooting during conference play. He shot 39% from three. He looks so confident taking threes. I see him out on the floor shouting at guys to get him the ball, which makes the spacing a lot easier. At the start of the year, I think teams thought, hey, this guy's both coming off that ACL injury, so his speed's not going to be great if we close out late. And maybe we don't even need to close out because he has to prove to us he could be a good three-point shooter. Well, I think he's really proven that this season, and that's why I think he'll close some games for Baylor, whether that's in place of Jalen Bridges or whether there'll be some game where LJ Cryer or Keyonte George isn't on the floor because Langston Love's playing so well, he's played him off the court.
They've been sizzling hot since that 0-3 start, Kendall. 7-1 since that time frame, and it's been hard to make up much room. I mean, Texas has been playing so well, and others around them have all obviously kept up pace as well. I was reading one of your articles, or maybe it was the podcast, you're talking about how this has kind of turned into a 3-team race here at the end, and obviously they'll see Kansas here in a few days. But outside of tonight being, kind of a must-win in that way, how do you see the standings shaking out here over these last couple of weeks?
I think, Craig, I wouldn't be shocked with anything. This is such a unique race with how good those top 3 teams are. I think right now Texas has a little bit of trouble with their final 4 games being so difficult, including ending the season at home against Kansas and still having to travel to Waco. Baylor has those 3 tough road games. You figure no game is an automatic loss, but I'm kind of penciling in they'll lose in Allen Fieldhouse. But then I think they can win in Manhattan. That was a close game last time, and there's just so much pressure at K-State from Marquise Noel and Keyonte Johnson to be elite every night that I don't know that can continue on when they've had to play 38 minutes a night. I think Jerome Tang's managed that team well. It's just the fact that the gap between Noel and Johnson and everybody else is so big that he has to play him too many minutes. So I think they can win in Manhattan. Stillwater's always a tough place to play, and that's a good spot for KU to get picked off because historically, for whatever reason, KU doesn't play great there. And Oklahoma State's playing some of the best basketball in the Big 12, even in spite of Avery Anderson's absence. So I think Baylor can win those 2. I think what it will come down to is can Baylor beat Texas at home? Can they win those 2 road games? If they do that, then they've got a good shot at splitting the league. But KU, with the home court advantage they have and the chance to beat Texas at home, and if they can pick up a game on Baylor at home, that would be tough to overtake. So I think right now, KU, I would say, is the plurality favorite to win the league. I think Baylor's got a decent shot to split it. I think it'd be pretty tough to overtake both Texas and Kansas and be the outright champion. But I think a good shot we have a split championship, and I think the most likely team to at least split part of it right now is KU.
Well, one thing Baylor had to do because of losing at home in those back-to-back gut-wrenchers to TCU and then also to Kansas State on last possession games, they had to then win. And they did at TCU, and they still have a chance to go to Kansas State and win. There's a lot of other games, obviously, including tonight with West Virginia. What's happened to K-State and Iowa State? Is it just the conference and the schedule catching up with them like it has with others just in different times of the year?
I think K-State's problem, Smokey, is that they were a really good team that blew away expectations, but they probably were not quite a top 10 quality team. And I like Jerome Tang a lot. I like Austin Carpenter, their director of player development, a ton as well. But I think they were more like a top 25 team that won a lot of close games against Baylor, won a close game against Texas where they hit about every shot imaginable in Austin, one of the best offensive performances I've seen. And they won a really close game against KU as well. So when you win all those close games, it can kind of mask that, you're not just an elite team who wins close games or has some clutch gene. It might be that you got a little bit lucky along the way, so you might fall sometimes in the future. I think Iowa State's a little dependent on having so many older guys who are 23 and 24. Well, it helps you out to start the season because the age gap matters and the experience of guys like Keyonte George needs to catch up to them. We've seen the leap Keontae's made recently. So I think that helped Iowa State get out in front of people. And I think TJ Otzelberger is an exceptional coach. But the problem is your 23 and 24-year-olds probably aren't going to improve a lot from November to February, whereas the freshmen at Baylor have certainly improved a lot when we talk about Langston Love and Keyonte George. And now Jonathan Chama-Chacha is back. And you look at Texas with Serge Abari-Rice getting inserted and the talent they have with Dylan Mitchell and KU with Grady Dick's development, and now Ernest Uda coming along. I think that has allowed those teams to rise more. Well, K-State, I think, is a little bit fatigued and probably played out of its mind, and Iowa State just doesn't have the guys to elevate themselves to quite that same level. But if Iowa State's in a 1-4 game against Purdue in the tournament, I'm going to take Iowa State to win that game.
What do you think about West Virginia?
I think this is the most unpredictable team in the conference. Just manhandled Oklahoma recently, gets crushed by Texas. They've had their lead assistant fired, and I use the passive voice there because Bob Huggins gave a statement and said he wouldn't address it. That almost made it seem like the university made the decision. You read the West Virginia message boards. It sounded like everybody still liked the guy, and there was nothing ethical about it. So I don't really know what's going on under the scenes there. But Eric Stevenson is an elite shooter. They've got good players like Trey Mitchell. So I wouldn't be shocked if West Virginia won this game. They're the kind of team that can do things like that, still top 25 across the analytics sites. So good team, capable of winning. But if you're Baylor and you think you're a national championship contender, barring West Virginia shooting like 12 of 17 from three. This is a game you need to win, and you should win.
What did, other than the obvious, the emotions, the lift, and the ability for him to even hit some shots from the perimeter, how much and what player on Baylor's team benefited the most from Jonathan Tchamwa coming back?
Really good question, Smokey, because I think he benefits so many different guys. I would say Adam Flagler, because it makes it a little bit easier for him to hit threes if teams have to deal with John on screens. I also think Langston Love as well. You look at John's first games back and how well Langston was able to switch with John, which made defense easier for Langston. And I think that buoyed his offense as well. So maybe a little out of left field to say Langston Love, but I think Adam Flagler's ability to get guys to go under screens where he can then pop off the dribble threes will go up with John on the court. So those two guys stick out to me.
Big 12 basketball. Texas are the game lead on Baylor, Kansas. And if you look, the cream has kind of risen to the top. Those were the teams at the start of the year, right, that were probably the ones picked to win the Big 12. And there's still a K-State, Iowa State if they get hot. How good a job has Mike Boynton done to get Oklahoma State where they are?
Exceptional job. Musa Cisse missed parts of the season. Avery Anderson's out now. Bryce Thompson's really developed from his time at Kansas. Was a McDonald's All-American. Had a disappointing freshman season and didn't shoot probably as well as he wanted last year at times. But he's been a great leader, I think, for the Oklahoma State team. And they take some tough losses in the non-con, but their computer numbers stayed pretty high level. And so for Oklahoma State to both survive, not being able to play in the NCAA tournament last year, which was a grave injustice. I mean, nobody on Boynton's staff was accused of doing anything wrong. And in fact, what the prior staff member was accused of was pretty minor, giving Jeffrey Carroll a slight amount of money. So I think I'd be really proud of Mike Boynton if I were an Oklahoma State fan. I think it's great for the league and Oklahoma State that he's turned it around, because you worried if they had one bad year, would Oklahoma State get stupid and think, oh, well, Mike Boynton had a bad year coming off a tournament ban. We got to fire the guy. I think he is the answer there. If you're good enough to both land Cade Cunningham and understand how to hire his brother and navigate recruiting to land the top players, and you're also good enough when you don't have maybe the elite talent to match up with a Baylor, Texas, or KU, because I think their roster on paper is probably worse than those teams. But I think they're very likely to contend with those teams and once again make the NCAA tournament. So good year for Mike Boynton. I think it's almost assured that either Jerome Tang or Rodney Terry will win Coach of the Year. But I think Mike Boynton has a case for Big 12 Coach of the Year with the job he's done in Stillwater.
We all love Jerome Tang, but if Texas maintains and wins the conference, I don't know how Rodney Terry could not be the Coach of the Year with what he took over at the time. Yeah. There's no doubt. Even if Kansas State makes a run, but what Rodney Terry has done is just phenomenal. Thanks for your time, Kendall. We appreciate it. Baylor tonight at home against West Virginia. 8 o'clock is the game on ESPN2.